I mean, how much of that was? I mean, how much of Barack Obama was that? You know, I mean, I'm thinking about Randall Kennedy had a book in 2011 called "The Persistence of the Color Line," which the argument was that he had to sort of like not be terribly assertive, not be seen as angry, you know, not keep arm's length away from his blackness or any relationship that he would have to the black community to sort of like satisfy. I mean, this is the president of the United States, right? I mean, presumably the most powerful man in the world. I mean, certainly Donald Trump has not had to step away from his whiteness in any fashion. There doesn't seem to be anything that he's stepped away from in any fashion whatsoever, frankly. But Barack Obama is constrained in that way.
Well, no question, and I feel like the great moment of all of this is the Henry Louis Gates story, where Gates gets arrested trying to go into his own house because he'd forgotten his keys. He's trying to break into his own house, and a average, everyday, random, run-of-the-mill beat cop gets a sit-down with the President of the United States.
Right.
Do you know how absolutely, objectively ridiculous that sounds? That this would never happen in any other instance. I can't even think of any other instance where the President of the United States would sit down with a rank-and-file employee who was actually in the wrong.
Right.
But to me, that was part of this reclaiming. It was a reminder that this president was not just a president, that this president had to be reminded that he was black first, and that there were certain concessions he had to make to white America to assure them, even though he's the most powerful man in the world, supposedly, he had to sit down and have a beer with this man. Any other president, Trump, Clinton, Nixon, Washington, would have laughed at it. But this became a story. And the fact that, and there's a part of me that understood what Barack Obama was doing, but I also felt that there was a moment where Barack Obama should have said, I'm the President of the United States, and this conversation's over. Of course I'm not going to sit with you. Maybe somebody else from, maybe you'd have some state delegate or envoy or someone go speak to the Cambridge Police Department.
Right.
But how on earth did that beer summit ever take place, and how did anybody cover that with a straight face?
I mean, how much do you think, and maybe this is off topic a little bit, but how much was that, like, did Obama have that moment where he's like, I'm the president of the United States, I can't believe I have to do this, but I'm going to do it because it's performative, or how much was it like...
Never had to do it.
Or was he the president of the United States because it was not his first thought to do that? I mean, is that why he could become the president of the United States? Because it had already been filtered out. He was that type of person who had that type of, like, my first reaction is, I should sit down with that cop. I can do, like, not indignation.
Yeah, and that's one of the big issues that I've always had with this, is this idea of, I always feared for President Obama for this very reason, this idea of being the racial bridge. And I always feared for him because I believed that he believed it.
Right.
And I believed that the opposition always used it against him, that he underestimated the deep opposition that he had, whether it was from the white people who were upset about him being president to the Republicans who pretty much openly said, our job is to make you a one-term president, that he believed that he somehow had the special sauce that allowed him to reach across the aisle. And it is and knowing his background and reading his history, it makes perfect sense that he would feel that way. We see it all the time. And, where I grew up and around those special, exceptional, high-achieving black kids who had to survive the white world, and they have huge numbers of white friends. They're somewhat detached from the black community because they live in white spaces, and they begin to believe that because all their white friends tell them, oh, I don't see color when I look at you, and they start to believe that they live in this, they believe they're not really what they are, and then they get reminded. And we all got reminded after 2008. To this day, in the 12 years since, we all got reminded about all that ridiculous post-racial fantasy talk. And you see now the retrenchment, and you see what has happened since. And it's never really been discussed enough to my satisfaction, but certainly I always worried about that because we've seen it at a smaller scale. And then something happens where the black man is reminded what you are here, and you're reminded very, very harshly. And everybody is scrambling to tell you it isn't what it is, except you know the difference.
Do you think he ever had that moment? I mean, obviously there's a lot of speculation here, but he's becoming, he's extremely wealthy, extremely successful now, entertainment. He is, basically spending a lot of his time with, billionaires.
Yeah, but what does that all say? I mean, certainly, does it mean he got rich? Yeah, a lot of black people are rich in this country. There's a lot of rich people. Michael Jordan's rich, Oprah's rich. There's a lot of black people out there who have significant amounts of money. Where I think you should see it, if he doesn't see it, I feel very bad, but I'm sure he does, is the complete undoing of his monument.
Right.
Of anything that he tried to do is being dismantled right in front of him. And it's not being dismantled because it was done by a predecessor. It was done because he was the predecessor. And you can't ignore that. And if you're him, I certainly hope you see it. I certainly hope that maybe the attitude is, well, I did what I did, and I'm proud of my time, and now it's up to somebody else. I can't fight for everything all the time, which I understand. And he's got a next act. He's got a second chapter, a second act. I get that part. But I certainly doubt that if you're Barack Obama or any person in this country, you don't look at this and see the dismantling that's taken place specifically to the things that he did. And with a fair amount of vitriol, whether you're talking about, Merrick Garland in the Supreme Court to
right.
virtually every Obama-era regulation that's been undone. So you can't tell me that's not at some level personal.
I would think. I wonder if it is. I mean, I wonder. I mean, I guess I just, I wonder where, how does that manifest itself? He's still exercising, I think, a significant control over just this race. I think he intervened behind the scenes with Buttigieg and Klobuchar. Obviously.
He's a titanic figure. I mean,
right.
He is one of the most significant figures this country has ever produced, which is a hell of a sentence.
Right.
So it's not like he's powerless. At the same time, there is extreme hostility happening, and that's one of the points when when you're talking about some of the positives or the assets that he has. That's also what this book is all about as well. When you look at the second half of the book, the essays about celebrity and about power and about how much celebrity, how much dispensation we give celebrity. And where did Barack Obama go? He went straight to Hollywood.
Yep.
And so you start to look at that celebrity is overpowering policy. Celebrity is overpowering reality in a lot of ways. Celebrity is overpowering politics in a lot of ways in terms of who now gets to be president. And remember, after the 2016 election, who were people talking about as a next possible candidate? Oprah and Mark
right.
Cuban.
Right.
Exactly. So here we go. And so you start to see that taking place, and you begin to ask yourself, especially for me, in that essay called The Hero Game, it is really all about the power of celebrity and how celebrity, in a lot of ways, is replacing policy. With Beyonce and Jay-Z and Kevin Durant paying for your college, or
right.
Robert Smith buying
right.
your college, or trying to have that. You can have this conversation, but you can't actually talk about debt forgiveness. And it's a really interesting place that we're in right now, where we're looking to LeBron James to save us, or you're looking to Bono to save us, and it just doesn't and shouldn't work that way.
Right, and I think there was some of that with Bloomberg on some level, but
100%. My billionaire is going to beat your billionaire.
Right.
It's certain, and that's when you're asking me, what does full dissidence mean? That's what I mean about how where we are today in some ways feels like surrender. I'm not sure that people truly, truly, truly believed that Michael Bloomberg was the proper candidate, but I do believe they felt like, we don't have the right weapon He's got the weapon, which is money. He's got the money to compete with the guy who's currently there because he got there because of his money and his visibility and his celebrity. And if that's what we're doing now, if we're playing sort of celebrity roulette, then we need somebody, a policy wonk can't beat this current guy. So we need something else. And so it really does feel like surrender. It's been interesting to see how much his campaign just absolutely imploded. But the reason it imploded wasn't because he was rich. The reason he imploded is because he was a bad candidate.
Right. Exactly. Like the idea of like a marginally bad candidate with that kind of money scares me, because like this guy was almost like uniquely bad, and that he could crumble like that. But I think the danger is still there. I think we might like to tell ourselves a story like his money didn't mean anything. Well, I don't know.
His money meant a lot. I just came back from spring training. I was gone for 9 days. I come home, and there's 14 Michael Bloomberg flyers in my mailbox.
Yeah.
And so believe me, had he been a better candidate, we're talking about a very different race.
Yes. Had he been a bad candidate instead of like an extraordinarily bad candidate, it might have been a totally different story. All right. Well, I've held you for a long time, but I really want to ask you about this. I'm curious because you tell the story of growing up in Dorchester, and at one point your parents making the decision when you were involved in busing to move to basically a suburban, rural, I guess, down in Plymouth at that time, which is on the South Shore. It's en route to the Cape Cod, and you became isolated and alienated from the Black community back in Dorchester. I guess really, like, how much of this experience do you think and the way that you entered into that experience, I guess, helps develop your perspective in this way?
Well, it's enormous, because what ends up happening is that you see this is the current. You get tossed into the river, and the current is taking you where? Away from your people. Away from your community, essentially you're being told at every turn, and your parents are being told, that you have no chance if you stay here. You're at a disadvantage if you stay here, and it may be a fatal one, both in terms of your prospects and maybe physically, because of the level of violence in that community. And so when I talked about an anti-blackness in sports, it's an anti-blackness in everything, where you're being told that the only chance that you have is to move to a community where you're in a predominantly white setting. The only issue was that predominantly white setting didn't want you. So you were essentially trading one set of physical violence for the emotional violence of being the only black kid in class. But in another way, it's actually completely aspirational. The white families who were leaving Boston because they didn't want to deal with busing, because they wanted a better life for their kids, they were moving for the same reason we were moving. And what was really interesting and explosive when we got down there was that they thought they were getting away from us and then had to deal with our family as a neighbor. And so it was sort of, you could feel sort of those levels of hostility at that time. What was also sort of interesting about it, too, was the message that was being sent to you as a child. And it was a message that would follow as an adult, that you are doing the right, all of this is for education, that education is something that is not deserved of black communities, that if you really want to aspire, you have to make that decision to separate. Your parents have to make that decision to separate. And that is an extremely powerful concept. It still exists to this day. It's reinforced more now than ever when you look at the statistics of, especially in New York City, it's happening right now. If you look at Beacon and some of those big, the elite high schools, they're completely segregated in a city like New York. So the message is being sent to black children everywhere that where you are is not going to be good enough unless you go to be around white people. However, last point of this is the statistics also show that if enough of you move to those white communities, the white people are going to move out. So it's this constant dance between, is it integration or is it assimilation? A few of you get to make it, but the game is still the same. If you want an individual chance, you have to sacrifice the group.
Well, the book is full Dissidence. It is a series of essays. It's fascinating stuff, and particularly, obviously, in this era we're living in is, it's of that era. It is Notes from an Uneven Playing Field. Howard Bryant, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Sam. This was great.